Okay, hello everybody, good morning. Almost lunchtime, and thank you for staying with us before lunch. We are just waiting for our last, there he is. Dragos, please join us. Thank you so much. No, that's okay, we're just starting. No, I know, but the other people have taken longer time, so we'll make sure we take a little bit longer, but we won't keep you very much. So good morning, everybody. My name is Bojana Bellamy. I'm president and I lead Center for Information Policy Leadership. We are global data privacy and data policy think and do tank out of Brussels, Washington, and London, and I'm based in London, delighted to be here. And thank you to Kari Laumann from the Norwegian Data Protection Authority for organizing and galvanizing us to have this really important session today on regulatory sandboxes. It has got a very snazzy title, Sandstorm or Just a Breeze? What is the fuss about the sandboxes? Let me perhaps set the scene very, very briefly. What are sandboxes, so that we know what we're talking about, because I know lots of people read different things in this. These are innovative regulatory tools that are normally set up by a regulator to enable responsible innovation and safe experimentation in a particular regulatory area. They started in the financial services, but are now spreading all around digital areas of regulation. And it's a very good way for a regulator to engage with the organization that is launching a product or service in a regulatory sandbox and have that constructive engagement and feedback loop to ensure that this product indeed is launched in the compliant way. But what you will kind of say, so why do we need this? Well, because in this new world of data protection, digital transformation, sharing of data, adoption of new technologies, really we are lagging behind in how we deliver and develop our laws and how we deliver implementation. So we need a better way to engage with those who are creating new technologies and products and services in a way that is not just old-fashioned command control, rules, tools, and enforcement, but given there are so many gray zones, given there are so many areas that are still developing both on technology and the policy and law side, this is an interesting way to ensure that continued dialogue. It is not let me say what it isn't a get out of jail card. It is not a way to not comply with the law. It's normally meant to ensure compliance in areas perhaps that are complex, perhaps gray zones. Why do we have this panel? Last comment. Well, because this is incredibly topical. We need to ensure experimentation takes place in a safe way and that innovation is done in a responsible way as well. We have seen lots of interest in regulatory sandboxes. Some of the governments are talking and implementing them, but most importantly, there are two important facts. One, AI regulation, proposed AI regulation that we will hear from our MEP Dragos Tudorache, who's been championing this, includes for the first time provision on regulatory sandboxes. But even before that, we did it first. The area of data protection, some of the data protection regulators are actually ex officio themselves building regulatory sandboxes. And here we've got, in fact, representatives from the Information Commissioner, ICO, as well as the Norwegian Data Protection Authority, who were the pioneers in developing and adopting regulatory sandboxes, and we will hear from them today. There are some others like CNIL in France who are also doing the same. So we at CIPL have been calling for sandboxes, published a paper in 2017 or 18. I honestly can't remember post-COVID, everything is a blur, but have been very much calling for this, and I'm delighted to see this taking place. And there's a very good report for those of you who are following this by OECD last year that is actually calling for sandboxes. So as I say, this is going to be interactive. We've got 4 phenomenal panelists with us. There'll be questions and time for questions as well. Raise your hand. I will probably leave it towards the end because I think we want to hear from them. So why don't I start with this fabulous panel and ask them just a very introductory remarks each. Really, what is your experience with the regulatory sandbox? And maybe Dragos, why don't we start with you, given that you were the one who has actually provided for this in the AI Act and have been championing. So how does AI Act regulate sandboxes? What's your experience and thought about sandbox?
Well, thank you, and sorry for being a bit late. It wasn't easy to park in this place, and then I was at the other venue. I like to think that Sandboxes is the places where innovation meets compliance. And for me, looking at one of the key objectives that was stated from the beginning for the AI Act, from the moment the Commission has put forward the proposal, one of the stated objectives, and I very much believe in that objective, is that it's supposed to actually stimulate growth, put artificial intelligence at the core of the economic growth based on digital services and products. And it's certainly also supposed to stimulate competitiveness in the European Union market, and also competitiveness vis-à-vis the other markets. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you do that while coming with regulation, which of course everyone knows is not necessarily something that companies welcome, because actually it puts an additional layer of administration, puts an additional burden in terms of compliance, requires you to do things that otherwise you wouldn't do, and therefore you'd make your life easier. So from the very beginning, I, as you rightly said, championed the idea with the Commission, and now I'm going to champion it also as part of the negotiations, because I'm the co-rapporteur for the AI Act in the European Parliament. I'm going to push as much as I can for sandboxes. And I do so because I think they're absolutely vital to actually ensure that innovation still takes place unhindered by the fear of regulation, by the fear of the rules. And it provides a safe environment for trial and error. And I think even the bigger element in it, which I also like to put always in these conversations about sandboxes, is that it ensures an even level playing field for competitiveness between the smaller and the bigger players. We are already in a market which is dominated by big players, where a young, bright engineer with a bright idea may not find it easy to actually go through, to start up, to scale up, because it's not easy, it's a competitive world out there. And then if you also come with additional layers of rules, which is what we do now with all of these, all this range of digital regulations which we are introducing in Europe, then again, you need to create a space where big and small can actually interact with the regulator. And if, even more so, if you are small and you can't ensure and you can't have access to an army of lawyers and compliance officers like the bigger players have, then it's even more important that you actually have a place where you can, again, engage with the regulator, make sure that your idea is tested and actually can go into the market safely. And again, we have time further on in Q&A. I don't want to monopolize it, but it's also an issue of where you take the sandboxes, how granular do you organize them, and it's again a very important conversation that I'm starting to have with my fellow shadow rapporteurs, because actually want to make sure that it's not something that is just put there to become a paper tiger or something that just the government would show off. We've done a sandbox and therefore no need for us to think about it any longer. There needs to be a very thoughtful process of actually cascading and creating sandboxes as close to the companies, to the startups as possible. Thank you.
That is great. By the way, I like this comment that you've made. It's a safe space for trial and error. And I think it fits very well with the way we develop technology, products and services, where we are reiterating all the time. And in fact, the same should be done with compliance. It never is a given moment, but it's a journey. Dragos, what is the, very quick follow-up, what's the level of support to the European Parliament? Are your colleagues, and not just Benifei, but others, do they sort of support Sandbox? Or are there concerns?
My impression from because we're still at the initial stage, in fact, the big finale is, well, the first step in the big finale is going to be next week, because it's the deadline for amendments, so we'll see how many hundreds of thousands of amendments we're going to have. But from the conversations that we've had so far, and don't forget that we've also had the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence Parliament, which I chaired, and which was a very good venue to test a bit the ideas, the ideologies in Parliament on various topics. And I have never felt resistance on this topic, never. From any corners of the House, no matter left or right. I think the idea of, because it is very much going to the heart of our economic environment, our competitiveness, and I think this is a shared understanding and a shared objective in the European Parliament, no matter, again, whether you're a socialist or a Christian Democrat, you do want your economic actors to actually make good use of artificial intelligence, embed them have the courage to take it in, because otherwise, again, we're missing a fundamental part of what this transformation is about. So I think it's going to be an easier sell than other parts of the regulation.
Of the regulation. Excellent, thank you. Well, let's hear now from the regulators who have been kind of working on this. Maybe I'll ask with Chris Taylor, simply from the Information Commissioner's Office, simply because they were at it for longer. Chris is the head of assurance and has been leading the work on AI. Chris, what have we learned in this process, and how does it work in the UK? You didn't have a regulatory regime about it. It is something that the ICO actually decided to do themselves. So tell us a little bit about how that decision came about and what are they about.
Sure, yeah, of course. It's really good to see everybody here today. It's the first time I've been out for about 3 years, so
Yes.
it's nice to see people in person. So our ICO's Sandbox journey started about 3-4 years ago. And actually it's very much in the reason and justification that Bojana set out at the start there. Our commissioner at the time recognised that for us as a regulator to understand how to regulate new and advanced technologies, we had to get close to those advanced technologies, and we had to play a role in supporting them to be compliant. So we see our Sandbox as being very much operating in that sense of creating a safe space, that sense of working to a certain extent in partnership with organisations to then try and work out how do we bring these really important public interest innovations, people that are doing exciting things with personal data that's in the interests of the wider society, how do we help those organisations bring them to compliance in a way that both works for us as a regulator, but that also works with the business models and with the approaches that the organisations have taken. So those were our objectives, and we set out, as anybody would when starting a project, with a bit of research and development time. We looked at the experiences in the financial sector, particularly the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK and their experiences of running a sandbox in the post-2008 financial crash, and looked at what we could learn from them. We looked at our legal framework, the degree of flexibility that we had within our existing framework to operate something like this. And as you can imagine, we had lawyers crawling all over it, making sure that what we were doing was justifiable and that we had the powers that we needed to do it. But one thing I would say that Bojana raised, which I think is really important, is if I just very quickly describe what our sandbox actually is, because there are lots of things that get us called sandboxes. So, and I try and talk about our sandbox in terms of the offer to businesses or the offer to public authorities or anyone that wants to work in our sandbox. And they essentially get three things. So the first thing they get on joining us in the sandbox is, after they've signed some terms and conditions, they get what we call a letter of regulatory comfort. And that is essentially in black and white, setting out the fact that if something goes wrong whilst they're in the sandbox with us, and then various caveats, if something goes wrong, but the organisation is straightforward with us, rectifies, and there are no issues, then we won't take enforcement action. So we will not use corrective measures. Okay? So they get a degree of that protection, that safe space. And then the main offer, the main thing that the organisations get when they're in the sandbox is essentially the provision of data protection informal advice. And that can take all sorts of different forms. We've sat in on development sprints, we've run workshops, we've done data flow mapping, we've looked at privacy information, anything that you can think of that has a privacy by design element, we will look at providing some level of advice or steerage over. Then that's all defined to a particular plan based around the innovator's particular objectives for their product or service. So that's the second thing that they get. And then the third thing is an exit report. So it's really important as a regulator that we're transparent about what we're doing, that people understand what we've been working on with companies, and that we really try and get the wider public interest benefits out of each project. So we have exit reports. They're all published on our website. They're quite detailed. They'll go into what we've learned, what the organisation has learned, and hopefully what some of the wider applicable learnings are across the sector, across industry. And there is the ability within that exit report to then provide a further statement of regulatory comfort. It doesn't go as far as to say guarantee of compliance, but what it does do is it says, look, based on what we've seen in the time that we've seen it, we don't think there's anything here that looks like it's in breach of the legislation. So it's the combination of those three things that organisations tell us is a compelling offer to be involved in the sandbox. And then skipping forward, so we set up the sandbox like that. We did it in partnership with innovators. We did it working with Sipple, who ran a workshop for us very helpfully. developed a lot of the systems and processes in public and with consultation. We've worked through a pilot phase with 10 different organisations, and I think we're up to about 30 or 40 organisations that have now gone through the sandbox at various stages. So where we're at the moment is we've had lots of learnings along the way, which maybe we'll come back to. But where we're at the moment is using our sandbox now to really focus in on particular key regulatory challenges for us. So still in quite broad areas, but using it as a targeted regulatory tool to address known challenges in the innovation world. They're still fairly broad, so they're covering big, broad topics like the use of privacy-enhancing technologies, supporting safe and effective data sharing, and we're also particularly interested, not least because of the Children's Code in the UK, in children's online safety, mechanisms, technologies looking to support privacy of children online. And we've got a whole range of projects working through there. I could go on and on about our sandbox, as you can probably tell by now, so I should probably stop at this point, otherwise I'll just keep going.
No, thank you, Chris. And you know, big shout out to the ICO for being brave enough to kind of start with this, but also to engage so constructively. A couple of things you have said. You said it actually enables us to be close to the business, close to the product, to understand what's happening. And I think there is this element of also regulator learning on the ground as to what happens, and important public interest, right? So there has to be just the real reason why this initiative is good for the bigger goal, which I think is a good criteria, but we'll talk about that as well. Kari, how does Norway differ from this or not? Obviously, your sandbox is a bit narrower. It relates to AI technologies, but I know you were sort of also looking at what the ICO has been doing. So tell us a little bit about yours.
Yes. Well, we definitely got inspired by the ICO. We were on a field visit to you guys some years back and got inspired. And we sold this idea to our government, which included it in the national AI strategy. And the sandbox was born in this strategy, and it's also nice to have it kind of embedded in the national system as such. Yeah, so the journey from there is that we also see that this is super relevant in Norwegian society. We wrote a report on AI and privacy in 2017, and I was quite disappointed when I spoke to companies in Norway because AI and all these possibilities and all the hype, but reality was that it wasn't really used much by Norwegian companies. Some chatbots and some very basic use, but not really. But I see a big change now. The applications that we get to the sandbox shows that all sectors use it. It's in health, education, welfare, gaming, you name it, and AI is there. And I think this is what we're going to see in the years ahead, that this is going to be used to. I think we're going to see a little bit of a catch-up effect, like it's been kind of holding back, but now the technology is there and available. And it's also very encouraging to see the companies that apply. They want to do good, they want to deliver good services, but they also want to have good privacy for the users. And I think this is also the goal of the sandbox, to help companies with responsible innovation. And another point that I wanted to make is that for us, this is a new way of work. We do give guidance, we have dialogue, we do case handling, we do enforcement, but to be able to go in depth and in dialogue with companies is a new way of work for us. And it's super interesting. And also, with regards to AI, there's not a lot of cases on this in Europe and in Norway, so we don't really know. The companies doesn't really know. The companies tells us, okay, we have the GDPR, we have general guidance, but how does it work in practice? And I think this is where the sandbox is given unique opportunity to dig deeper into issues where we don't know the answer. When it comes to fairness, transparency, data minimization, what does it mean in practice in AI cases? And for us, it's been 1.5 years of sandboxing now, and we have learned a lot. I hope the companies, one of the participants is here, has learned, but I can notice at the DPA, we are having discussions about AI that we could only dream about having a year ago, because we need to understand not only the technology, but the legal side, the business side, the communication side, the design side, a lot of different aspects of using personal data in AI applications.
And Carrie, I remember that guidance. It was the first guidance actually that any data protection authority published on responsible AI. And we had this event in Nordic Privacy Arena, which was, and you were right, it was so early on. Now, of course, times have changed. And again, thanks for the pioneering work. I was just looking on my phone trying to find, but I couldn't quickly. In today's FT, a professor whose name I was trying to find, sorry, he's a professor at the ESAD Business School in Barcelona. He talks about why there hasn't been such a huge adoption of AI in Europe and in all companies. And he says there are a number of reasons, and of course technology, ability to have data, know-how, talent, but he says those that have adopted technology are going to be miles ahead competitively than those that haven't. It's going to be a massive differentiator and competitiveness. So you all talked about competitiveness. We really need to enable Europe to use AI in a responsible way. Otherwise, really, we all be left. And even within Europe, there'll be two-way Europe. So it's kind of, please have a look, FT Today. I'm sorry, I just couldn't find quite the name. Okay, well, let's hear about the company who has actually bravely gone and done this. Elred Andreas Gjere is from Secure Practice in Norway, and you are actually a startup, SME, small company that has benefited from. So why did you do it? And what was it like?
Yes, well, just to tell you a little bit about our background.
Or maybe tell about your product.
Yeah,
exactly.
or Secure Practice. We help people stay safe in a digital world, and our business model is really simple. We sell licenses to companies who then provide training to their employees. So we make money out of that, not by the data and the value of the data as such, but still. We think we wanted to create more personalized training, which helps people better, more efficiently and effectively. So we wanted to personalize this. And to do this, we had an idea of we wanted to profile employees with kind of a risk assessment to find out, of course, their level of knowledge and interests. And based on this, we would be able to then, with machine learning, artificial intelligence, provide more, better training. And so, privacy in the workplace, that's like a big topic, and we understood quite early from Norwegian DPA that this was a big topic for them as well. We saw the Sandbox. Personally, I have a background in as a research scientist from academia and applied research in security and privacy research. I worked with privacy by design and this for since my master's thesis, and I always kind of had this. I've been aware that it's not like a zero-sum game to work with privacy. It is possible to achieve functionality without always compromising on privacy or vice versa. If you just get really deep enough into the problem. And of course, with the legal constraints or uncertainty we have, there is a bit of a risk to dive into yes, we want to build a product that kind of is risky. And also, we know it was when we pitched our idea for the Sandbox application, it was a bit controversial to profile employees in companies. At least in Norway, this is a bit okay, do we really want to get into that that topic? And we were a bit tabloid in our application, but that worked. And as I understood, it was let's do this to try to see if there is actually a way, if we really want to grasp this problem really thoroughly, can we find a way to do this, which is good, because after all, if people get hacked, it is really bad for their privacy.
And tell me, are there business benefits for you from participating? Is your product better because of this? Are you able to perhaps use this in your pitches to the clients and say, well, actually, we went through the Sandbox. Have you got some publicity? Good one, hopefully, as a result of it.
Well, of course, we got publicity. We learned a lot from working so focused with the DPA on these exploratory sessions. We did these workshops both with the legal side and with yeah, Kari, you participated. We did focus groups. We did meet like the Norwegian Equality and Non-Discrimination Ombud. We had a meeting with workshop with labor organization. Yeah, so we got to explore a lot and trying and failing bits. Of course, we weren't like bound to fail. We thought there would be a good chance we get out alive. But of course, we had to be a little bit brave. So some have like approached me and said, "Yeah, so looks like you came out of it alive." When you see like the report is out now in English as well. And I'm glad we kind of learned the things we did, and it provides transparency and certainty assurance for potential customers.
Good. Okay. Well, why don't we then go into the questions, and do think about your questions as well, and dig a little bit deeper. I'd like us to think a bit about sort of really what is Sandbox for. And in our prep call, we talked about, is this a large-scale driver of innovation, or is it a bit of a regulatory scalpel, or perhaps laser where you just sort of tinker on the edges? And let me say why we're asking this question. You know that even today, and we wrote about this at CIPL as well, I mean, that there are tensions between some of data protection principles, for example, of Gdpr, and then also how AI works. And I know the AI Act is trying to, right, Dragos, address some of these. We've seen now better allowment for use of sensitive data to ensure that algorithms are not biased or not discriminate. But there is also purpose limitation and its contractions, data minimization, retention. We need lots of data for AI. We need to share data. But GDPR kind of sometimes stops us. So there's some real trade-offs that need to be done. And I would kind of hope this would be a good place for Sandbox to test some of these things. Is that the case, Chris and Kari? Has that happened in your cases? Were you testing some of these trade-offs? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about. And Dragos, how do you see this? I mean, is this a chance for us to, without regulatory change, sort of tweak a little bit how these different laws all fit together in these digital files? Yeah, Dragos, go ahead.
Well, I think there's something that is missing, and it's quite fundamental in the current landscape, which is standards. I don't think that when even the Commission thought about the new range of digital legislation, that they've actually put enough thought in how would we actually then arrive, once you've defined the broad concepts, the broad legal definitions, how do you arrive at standards? Because again, for the engineer to actually put together a set of technical specs on the basis of you telling him that these data sets have to be free of bias. What does it mean? How do I, as an engineer, translate that requirement that you've put in the law into specs for my product? That's the question. And if I don't have standards that are actually written in a way that, for me as an engineer, as a developer, it makes sense, and I can actually, again, translate them into what I do, then I'm lost. And I think the Sandbox can only do as much. And the answer to your question is that you go from there to the scalpel, depending, again, on how quickly there will actually be a concerted effort to put together standards that would also, by the way, make sense between the different pieces of legislation that we're going to have soon, more or less all of them coming into effect at the same time. Because if we look at the DSA, the Governance Act, the Data Act, the AI Act, so all of these things will more or less be hitting the market at the same time.
Yes.
And again, I started to put this pressure on the Commission to start very seriously thinking, how will we very quickly arrive at a place where we have standards? Right now, if you look in the actual proposal of the Commission, and I don't agree with that approach either, is they say up until there's going to be standards, we, the Commission, will be writing specifications. That I don't think is right. Because I think when drafting standards, one needs to be as close as possible also to those that are, again, playing with this technology. You need to do them bottom up.
Right.
And the Commission sitting in an office and writing technical specifications is not the answer.
Yeah.
It may sound appealing, but it's not the answer. So again, I think that coming back to the sandboxes, it's again going to put quite a lot of responsibility on the actual sandboxes and the authorities, the regulators that will actually be playing in the sandboxes. Because in the absence of those standards, there's going to be, that's why I said at the beginning, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of doing both broad brushes as well as scalpel work to be able to help basically compensate for lack of clarity in terms of standards. I hope that, again, this plea and this cry for focusing on standards is going to be heard. There's also quite a lot of work, and that's an interesting development under the Trade and Technology Council with the US.
Yes.
There's going to be quite a lot of common work dedicated on standards, which is a good thing, both in terms of preparing, aligning standards on a transatlantic level, but also in thinking together, us and the Americans, how do we make sure that the standards that we believe are right and they fit with our values and with our vision of the future digital world are going to be to become standards at the global stage. Because there you're going to clash with different visions coming from different players on the global scene, which unfortunately over the last decades have taken quite a center stage in many of the standard setting bodies in the UN and in the landscape in the multilateral organizations. And I think that's a very important work that will need to be at the center of the discussions that we have with like-minded partners.
Do you think that, I mean, I appreciate the distinction and the need for standards, but do you think the sandboxes could be a good experimenting ground to actually start seeing these standards? Because that's where the regulators will see them coming.
I have a lot of hope and trust and I think a lot actually, no pressure, but a lot will actually be for the sandboxes to do. Because again, I don't think, unfortunately, that this standardization work is going to come very, very quickly, which means that a lot will actually be left for the sandboxes to work, and this is where the regulators can compensate for that lack of clarity in terms of standards.
Great. Carrie,
Yes.
the same question.
Yeah. So can sandboxes be the driver for large-scale innovation? It sounds very ambitious. And I don't think sandboxes can do that alone, but maybe they can be a tool to help companies. Because I also see some companies that maybe see barriers for access to data and use of data that's maybe not there, or at least you can handle them, or you can explore how can you overcome these barriers. So I really hope that we are able to contribute with innovation. Our commissioner said that for him, he would measure good success if the Norwegian Sandbox could foster the next privacy-friendly Google. That's quite ambitious. I don't know if
no pressure then.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I don't know if we can do that. And also, I think the goals of the sandbox is, yes, to enable innovation, but it's also to draw up some lines, like how far can we go? So that's kind of interesting space to work in, because we want innovation, but not for any price. Right. And that is the room that we're trying to explore. And when we pick projects for the sandbox, we try to pick the complex ones, the gray zone projects, to kind of to dig into the issues. But also, we noticed that a lot of the companies have quite basic questions. That's not specifically AR. It's quite like, what is the legal basis? When, like, quite easy questions. So I think also maybe we should explore how can we answer those questions in a good way, not only the complex ones. Would that maybe foster innovation complementary to the...
And have you seen in your sandboxes to date, well, I know you've got one participant, have you seen some of these trade-offs that we talked about, you know, where you kind of have to flex or perhaps even change your mind as based on what you're seeing in reality?
Yeah. I mean, I think your project is a good example of that, where it's quite controversial, profiling of employees to give tailored training. But I think we found some good solutions of you taking on some more responsibility for handling of the data, shielding some of the data from the employers about their employees and so on. So I think that was a quite interesting trade-off, in that project.
Alan, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. We wanted to provide a guarantee for employees that their risk information, their risk profile would not be accessible to their employer. So we entered into the project having this idea. We wanted this to happen. How can we legally and technically guarantee that this would not take place? So through the project, the Sandbox, they came up with this solution that we would take on joint controllership for specifically for the risk information that we process on every employee. So that means we also take on more responsibility. We're not just a data processor, but we think this is a good way to achieve our goal. And to provide this legal firewall as well between the data and employer to provide safety. And then we faced like many questions like on trade-offs, like we had in our very first workshop. We kind of on purpose threw up a lot of very controversial suggestions that this is what we could profile. That could potentially have a value for security, like profile. And then we had all the safe ones, and then we have the middle ones. But it was like a good exercise to have someone say, of course, we were never planning on doing like the very controversial things like crawling the social media profiles of employees, right? We didn't want to do that, but we just threw it into the mix of things, and they were like, no, you can't do that. And then you put out these boundaries, which are good to name.
And if I might add, I think also the security you then provide to employees has an effect on the solution itself. We found that in the focus group where they said, okay, if as an employee, if I don't know how my data will use when I answer a quiz, will I answer truthfully about whether I maybe opened an email I shouldn't have clicked on a link? Will I answer truthfully if I'm not sure how my data will be used? If my boss will see what I answered, which maybe wasn't favorable, will that have a consequence for me? If you're unsure about that, it can have a chilling effect, and it can also skew the answer, so that if you don't answer truthfully, the result of the algorithm will not be accurate, and the training that you are that's tailored for you will not reflect your actual needs. So I think that was quite an interesting effect, that if you have trust, you can also have better accuracy and a better product. You're not only complying to legal qualification, but it actually affects the end result of the product.
Two-way learning, I like that very much. Chris, what about some of your case studies and some of the trade-offs and interesting? I know you're going through some. I don't know whether you are able to maybe preview or tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so, I mean, on the first question around, what's the purpose of a sandbox? Is it large scale or is it laser focused? This isn't a very scientific term, but we're kind of in the middle of that spectrum at the moment with the projects that we're doing. They are pretty deep engagements. So a lot of our conversations are around how do we make sure we get the most impact out of those engagements with participants, because we're very lucky in the UK to have quite a large DPA, but even for us, there's a resource cost, of course, and so we have to be able to make sure that we're showing how we are informing standards, informing our guidance, benefiting companies, and so on. So we're at the deep engagement end of the spectrum, and where we're starting to think now is actually thinking more of what are the range of regulatory tools that we have to support innovation. Sandbox is one. And the way we've constructed it, it tends to lend itself to substantive, deep engagement on really hard things, really difficult challenges. But I think Carrie's absolutely right, that the more we engage with innovators, the more we realise that as much as what they're doing might be complex and challenging, actually some of the data protection challenges can be more simple than perhaps anyone realises. So there is a lot of thought going on in our office at the moment to how can we create a sandbox light, a kind of a rapid response sandbox, a more individual query-based sandbox, and how does that stack up against a range of tools for different types of innovation, different places along the innovation journey. And then in terms of trade-offs, I mean, we see them all the time on our projects. There's one that is meant to be going live today. The exit report was meant to come out today. It's not yet out on the website, so I might have to go and chase the comms team and see why it's not out yet.
Exactly. You were speaking about it. They better get it out.
But it's a really interesting one, and it's all about use of facial recognition for age verification, which is obviously a fast-moving, contested space, difficult from a privacy point of view, and that is one where absolutely we've been in the world of trade-offs. I'll probably do the argument of an injustice now, but I'll try. We have a particular position in our guidance around when biometric data counts as special category data. And this particular case study has really pushed our existing guidance position to the point where we realise that our existing guidance position doesn't work. So we know that we need to update our guidance position to a more, depending on which bit of the ICO you talk to, a more forgiving, a more worrying, more relaxed, more innovation-friendly, depends on who you talk to, position on our guidance that will actually recognise that there can be situations where it doesn't equate to special category data. We then got a trade-off with lots of questions coming against, okay, well in what precise cases does it count as special category and in what precise cases does it not? But of course we haven't done that work. We've done one use case. So it is really the trade-offs of how do we update our guidance and policy positions to account for a use case where we know it's basically invalidated our existing guidance. But how do we do that without opening up the floodgates to all sorts of practice that we might not think probably does go over the line of what's acceptable. So that's operating very much in that space at the moment. And ultimately what it has kicked off, just working with that one company has kicked off a much wider project now within ICO looking at, we're looking at biometrics in lots of contexts, but specifically looking at this particular issue and recognising the need for better standards, better guidance on this kind of area. So it was a challenging project, but for evidencing why a sandbox can work and what it's meant to do, it's absolutely on the money for pushing us and challenging us all to get those standards, those boundaries in the right place.
Right. Because it is true that facial recognition is we've seen these discussions in the AI Act as well. It raises concerns, but there is going to be more and more use of this. So the question is, which uses are potentially beneficial, and how do we do that? I particularly, I'm kind of thinking everything you've all said makes me think that these sandboxes are going to be really invaluable in this new world where we're going to have to do these trade-offs. We talked about the AI trade-offs, you gave some examples. Children's data as well. We're going to have children's protection on one side, but children's privacy on the other as well, children's right to information and then privacy. Under the DSA will have to monitor and moderate content through the use of AI tools again. That's going to have also considerations, AI Act, privacy, safety and privacy, security. Really, AI is hugely used for security, anti-fraud, but all of this raises questions. So it seems to me that it could be sort of almost like a specifically well suited for this kind of trade-offs and clashes between different legal regimes, because I know companies are struggling a little bit with this, and lawmakers, they make laws, but how does this really work in practice? Could be different. Anyway, that's just a comment. But
I think that's right, though.
Yeah.
If I can,
sure, of course.
There was a really good report a few years ago from an innovation think tank in the UK called Nesta, and it was all about how regulators can react to innovation and the different options that they have available to them. And they talked in terms of three main areas. So regulators can try and provide advice to innovators, so it's an advisory function. They can try and adapt the regulatory framework to take account for innovation. They can try and anticipate the future changes and make changes in advance. Those are the kind of three broad approaches that you've got. So I think there's a real question for how do we move from providing advice on what we're seeing in terms of innovation now into the really transformational stuff, which is if we can get beyond providing advice into the anticipatory side of it, looking at where innovation is actually going in the future, and then making the changes almost in advance of that. That was certainly my ambition for the future of it anyway. Right. But we're still dealing with innovation as it's hitting us now.
Exactly. Dragos.
If I may, just to add, because I'm very encouraged by what I hear from Chris, because in my mind, that's exactly what I would like the sandboxes on AI Act to look like. That's why I want to push beyond what the text says right now and really institutionalize the idea of a sandbox to do actually all of the three things above. Because I think that all of those three things are fundamental if we really want, again, for the AI to act as we want it to act in terms of driving and not actually becoming a nuisance, a problem, always a spanner in innovation, in thinking and in developing your business. If we want uptake, if you want buy-in into the technology, if you want it to go granularly into everything we do, which is what the trend seems to be, again, you need to create all of the above. You need to be anticipative, you need to be adaptable as a regulator as well, because this is going to be a technology that it will constantly change.
Absolutely.
It will leap constantly from one reality to the next. And already the rules that we're working on right now, they're going to be most likely obsolete, some of them in 6 months, in 1 year, in 2 years' time. And I think sandboxes, again, if you set them right, if you set the role of the authorities, of the regulators in these sandboxes right, if you also provide the right stimulants for them to actually do these things, both be anticipative as well as be advisory in what they do, I think then, again, these places can really become the engines behind the implementation of this text and of all the other texts, in fact, because I think that the same approach is needed for all the rest. Otherwise, I actually fear that some of these rules would not be producing the effects that we want them to produce. So that's why I said, and it's what just for the sake of this discussion, I do think that they are a fundamental piece of in the construction that we want to put forward.
I like very much. You've heard it first, right? So we've got now 3 aspects: advisory, anticipatory, and what was the third one?
The other one.
Sorry, adaptable, exactly. No, I like this very much. But it seems to me to do that, we need also organizations to be ready to share, right? And I work with a lot with private sector organizations. I'm all the time saying, we need to share, we need to inform what we are working on, where the world is moving. And I don't know everybody's very comfortable doing that. I mean, some of the people in Sandbox, about Sandbox said, well, you know, we are now opening our crown jewels, we are telling what we will be working on, commercial sensitivities, etc. But to anticipate, I really think we do need to work like that. I mean, especially on the new generation of tech. I mean, as you say, AI is maybe, well, there's neurotech, there is crypto, we talked about that. There is all the kind of new things that are coming now, quantum, and what does that mean? So how do we get organizations, how do we give them comfort to come and talk to regulators in a sandbox? And how do we incentivize SMEs in particular? Because I think they need to, I mean, you talked about leveling the playing field, Dragos, right? So it's not just the big companies that can now have the army, but these small ones. I mean, does regulator give a preferential treatment for the SMEs and startups of Europe, for example? And how, and what about the concerns? Did you have concerns about your sort of commercial confidentiality and opening your crown jewels?
Well, of course, there are measures to protect our crown jewels, although we engage with the DPA in the project, so it's not like the whole world will get insight into everything. But we also were aware that, okay, if we want to use this project not only for our own sake to kind of do things right, but actually build trust, we need to be transparent as well. And transparency is, of course, can be daunting. Sometimes if you're a startup, you have your priorities, you need to do everything all at once from the get-go. But of course, I think building trust requires you to be transparent. I think there were many benefits to the project for us as a startup, just getting access to the legal expertise through our project, to get these discussions in a kind of gray zone area that we were like in the state of, okay, we haven't built the product yet, but we were kind of in the phase of building. So like it was very good for us to do this at the time we did it, because we would know we wouldn't build stuff that wouldn't cut it with the privacy legislation. So I mean, we had so much value from the project. We started we were 3.5 years old, the company. Now we're soon 5. We got the exit report a couple of months ago, but didn't contain any surprises, of course. But we kind of got out alive, and then also we get some good publicity, and of course for SMEs. Yeah, sure. That is also a positive factor. I can't disguise that fact. But
Kari, do you give this letter of regulatory comfort the way the ICO does?
No, but the ICO was very kind to share like what kind of documents they had when we built our sandbox. But I also think maybe there are some differences in culture, because we felt like, oh, if we give this contract to the company, it will maybe scare them away. So we kind of try to be open at the website, like what we'll do and not do. And to be honest, we haven't really had any issues regarding confidentiality or business secrets. All the participants have been more than happy to share, and also more than happy to share experiences in the exit report. There's never been any issues around that. But also, like, we don't have a need to expose specific algorithms or anything like that. This is, I mean, describing the business situation and maybe the data flow, and then saying like, and then we discussed this and assessed this, and this was the kind of conclusion. So we haven't really, it hasn't been an issue for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Same. Okay.
It was something when we were first developing the sandbox we thought we were concerned would be a significant issue, but our experience has been very similar, that actually when we get into doing the practical working with the participants, there's a high degree of kind of motivational alignment for doing it, which is I think what you were talking about. They want to build trust and confidence by being transparent. We want to build confidence in the way we're regulating through that transparency. There's a good degree of alignment. And then also the practicalities of actually just working on the projects means that you discover ways of writing about things that don't give away things that you don't need to be given away, basically. So.
Alvin, do you want it?
yeah, I could just add, we've been contacted by companies, like large companies, like, yeah, really interesting that you're in the sandbox. You're bringing up some issues that we're experiencing ourselves, but we really don't dare contacting the DPA about it. So thank you, and we look very much forward to the results. And then I also got this question from a journalist in from an American article, like, why are you actually showing your bell button to the world and to the Data Protection Authority, taking this initiative? But it's maybe it's culture and maybe it's trust, but the Norwegian DPA has always been, or at least for many years now, been very guiding and had this very positive approach to the industry, and so we felt it was safe, actually.
Right. Dragos, you wanted to make a
comment? I want to add something to this, which I think is important, but I'm also curious to see if there's a different feedback here. My concern, but the one thing that I always talk about is expertise. I think that now for the AI Act in particular, those that will be operating the sandboxes, the regulators, will need a range of expertise that is much broader, more complex than what we've had with the GDPR up to now. Because AI is a more complex beast. It can take actually myriads of forms, and it can go into all sorts of use cases that you can't even think of. And I think that the level of understanding, flexibility, but also profound knowledge, technical knowledge, that will be required with the authorities that will be operating the sandboxes is at the level that I'm not sure up to now administrations have been prepared to hire and retain staff. And I think that's a very important piece of thinking that needs to be done also at the level of governments. It's also going to be easier in some member states than in others, which is going to create fragmentation and uneven contexts and opportunities for engineers and companies depending on where they are, which is exactly the contrary of what we want to achieve with the digital single market. So I think that around this issue of expertise, of finding the right resources to staff these sandboxes and the future regulatory authorities for AI, is quite a lot, that investment that we need to put in.
That's a great point. I mean, we've all been calling for investment into regulators on privacy side, but on all sides, frankly, because they really need to upskill. And we heard a commission is going to be hiring 500 people just to do DMA implementation in the commission. So, and Dragos, this is actually going to be, dare I say, a particular problem now with AI Act, because the competent authority may not be data protection authority at all, maybe somebody else, but if it's personal data, it will be DPA. So here we may have a situation where we have multiple sectoral authorities enforcing AI Act, plus the DPA enforcing it for personal data, and then we'll have, of course, DSA, DMN, and so on. So you know, how do we run these sandboxes? I mean, will there be cross-regulatory sandboxes at some point? Will the Data Protection Authority have to join forces with the regulator for automotive industry, for example, or drugs, or something like that?
Well, I would certainly hope so. I think that right now, again, this is, I think, the one piece, and I've told this to both Commissioner Breton and Vestager. Yeah. I think that now that they've completed the list, I think they need to add one more thing, which they haven't thought about at the beginning, which is something that actually connects all these.
Right.
In the new drop-down list of acts that they've put on the table, which are, well, they'll be tweaked, but they're great initiatives, in my view. But I think the one thing that is missing in terms of governance and in terms of coherence is something that actually drives through all of them and puts them together. Yeah. And I think that in the design, and the thing is that the effort that is being done right now to align somewhat the models between the DMA, DSA, AI Act, etc., is already not a bad thing. So, for example, now in the AI Act, you might have seen in my initial report, we're pushing for a model that resembles somewhat the DSA, or a bit the competition area with the 2 layers of competence, central and national, and also with a much stronger AI board. But from my point of view, that's not enough. Because even if you're going to have a stronger board at the European level to ensure coherence, even if you're going to have some of the competencies for regulating some type of the algorithms and the use cases that are really at a scale where national regulators can't interact with them properly. So even if you'd have all that, you'd still have a board for AI Act, a board for DSA, a board for Data Governance Act, and so on and so forth, which in my mind is nuts. It's nuts because, again, you're really not doing what you say you want to do in terms of creating that single market, allowing companies to actually play out the benefits of the entire 27 member states market, so on and so forth. A market that already has its own intrinsic issues in terms of fragmentation, different languages, so on and so forth. Right. So I think that if we don't do an effort now, at the design stage, to actually find a way to mix these things up at every level possible. So from the European level, all the way to the national level, or even if we would go down to the regional or municipal, so that in a sandbox, if I go in there, I'm not only reacting and interacting with the DPA, but I'm also interacting with whoever will be the AI authority, maybe the DPA, maybe some different authority. Another layer of complexity, maybe different member states will choose different solutions. You may have some member states that will decide that they would appoint their data protection regulator to also be the AI regulators, and others that may not. So again, that would result in madness if there's no effort to bring all of this together. And I think the sandbox is, again, a place where you can also test a bit how you actually do this. How it will work, right. So one extra reason why I believe so much in the very practical use of sandboxes.
A sandbox for the sandbox.
Yeah, exactly.
Sandbox for sandbox, exactly. Chris, is there something we could learn? And I mean, you know, there are other countries which are experimenting. Is there something we can learn from the UK DRCF? This is the Digital Regulatory Cooperation Forum, and it's been copied now by Netherlands. Australia is also doing something similar with the 4 regulators: competition, privacy, Ofcom, which is content, DSA, right? And what did I say? Financial service, financial, the 4 of them. We're sitting together and kind of have got a program and plan and working on things.
I mean, I think it's an important part of the landscape, yeah. So the DRCF I think it's about a year in existence now, and it has a programme of work that is looking at issues that are germane across all of the space. So the Competition and Markets Authority are definitely involved as well, because a lot of these issues cross competition law as much as they do any other space. I'll speak really frankly from a personal perspective. The ambition is brilliant. The reality of working across multiple regulatory regimes and multiple regulators' organisational boundaries, structures, priorities, funding streams, makes some real challenges for delivery. So certainly in the first year, what the DRCF have focused on is, and again, this is going to sound less scientific than the people working on it would like it to sound, but by just let's do some things together, right? Let's find some activity that we can all agree on that are hitting all of our priorities, and let's get working together on what they are. It may not be perfectly designed, it may not be in the first year, but we need to start doing some of this cross-regulatory work to start actually creating the pathways between the organisations, the relationships, the models of working, so that we can build that sense of collaboration over time. So I don't think it will be a big bang type effect, but I think you will see increasing coordination across the space, and the DRCF has been a really, really important model for that. And the Sandbox, just as running joint investigations, just as running joint exploratory work, researching new areas, could be a possibility. So, of course, could be some sort of joint Sandbox activity. And we have actually done, but coming at it from a slightly different direction, some joint sandboxing work in the past. So our government ran a funding competition to support regulators a funding competition to support regulators supporting innovators, which we used to essentially try and insert the concept of data protection sandboxing into other regulators' innovation spaces. So we worked in partnership with the Financial Conduct Authority. They have their own sandbox. We put together a little team to go in, and when an organisation was going through the Financial Conduct Authority sandbox, they could also get advice on any data protection issues. And we also did some work training the Financial Conduct Authority staff in data protection, in basic level data protection, so that they could actually provide some level of data protection expertise themselves onto the sandbox. And we did other things with some of the other regulators as well, our Civil Aviation Authority, I think our Energy Authority, and a range of others. Now, that funding's come to an end, and we're starting to think about how we go forward with it. But that interface space is the thing that innovators want, we think, to go to one place to get multiple sets of support, multiple sets of advice in a way that's coordinated. Absolutely, I think that's got to be part of the future.
Well, that's one perhaps easier position that you find yourself as UK, right? Less regulators to coordinate than the EU has got. But Carrie, the world Dragos describes, it's going to be, obviously you are EEA, you're not even quite EU, but you will have to also work with the European regulators. Can we imagine a world where there will be mutual recognition, for example? So if somebody so let's say Ireland now wants to launch this same product in France and, in the EU. It's gone through the sandbox. There is some kind of mutual recognition that this product is safe and sound and good enough, right, by other regulators. So do you see that kind of international cooperation arising, or something else?
There is a lot of cooperation in Europe when it comes to GDPR, and it's not all easy. I think it's the learning from these 4 years. But in terms of sandboxes, I would love to see more cooperation to harmonize the guidance that we give there. You could imagine that we pick the same kind of topic or technology and maybe have some exchange across projects. I think that would be super interesting. Maybe explore fairness, or maybe explore one of the new technology that we see emerging. Or maybe EU sandbox, just like there's a national, there could be kind of at EU, just like certifications. We had both, right? Certifications at EU level, seal, and national. Maybe something like that. And also we can dream. Yeah, we can dream, and also in terms of competency, as Roger says, it's super hard to have that and build that competency. And if you can use cooperation to share and help each other build competency, I think that's a good thing. Okay, I see lots of questions. Okay, please grab the mic, or there is one there, and come and start queuing. Yeah. Sorry, just there, next to you. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm Stuart Dresner from Privacy Laws and Business, the world's longest-running publication on this subject, 35th anniversary this year. My point on this subject is that we published an article on FIDO one of the first graduate from the UK scheme, and we published an article which I'm happy to make available. Now, facial recognition, we heard of Clearview, which hit disasters investigations in the UK, Canada, Australia, being banned everywhere. But on FIDO, having gone through the UK sandbox, has had no regulatory problems. They did it the right way. So we wrote an article about that, which I'm happy to make available to everyone. All you got to do is give me your email address and I will send it to you. So there we are. On FIDO, the case study, graduated for the UK sandbox, no problems.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you. Okay, gentleman next.
You're on commission.
A small question on the real practice of a sandbox. Imagine I'm a company, I have a funky new startup, great technology, and I want to go to the sandbox. First part of the question, how does that work? Do I just send an email in your cases, or do I need to pitch it? And second part, in real practical terms, what does a sandbox mean? Is it meetings? Is it workshops? Do I give a demonstration of my product? How should I imagine that?
Okay. Shall we collect a few more questions? The lady behind and then Simon Henia. And we'll pass to you as well.
Hello. I would like to have a question about the AI Act and why regulatory sandboxes and not other experimental tools like sunset clauses or experimental clauses. And what should we waive and how to waive rules if the AI Act is is principle based and we don't have any standards?
Okay. Simon?
Hey, Simon Ania, I'm the data protection officer at Uber. It's fascinating that we have two people of non-European EU countries explaining what the sandbox is. So it's great that Mr. Todarashi is really trying to make sure European companies are not going to sandbox in Norway and the UK. So that's very, very
we
good.
did try to invite Keneal, but we were told we can't have five reg people.
But it brings me to the question on how does the AI sandbox, how do Chris and Kari foresee the sandbox in the AI to interoperate or dovetail with prior consultations and the consistency mechanism? Now, maybe for Chris that's an easy answer. So I have a question for Chris as well. How much money do you spend on the sandbox? What's your percentage of your budget, same for Kari, you spend on the sandbox, roughly? And how much enforcement action will you prevent from that? So what is the cost versus benefits, being proactive versus reactive? Any ideas based qualitative on what your current experience is? Because that may give some interesting social capital, effectively, to these proposals. And then I have one last question. Can we please call it innovation spaces rather than sandboxes? I think it's a much better term. Because a sandbox seems like a playground, we do it for. No, this is real serious stuff.
It's very visual, though.
Yeah, but in innovation space, we have data spaces and we have innovation spaces. So that's just my... Let's use another term.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And gentlemen here, I think you're right.
Thank you. So just let's continue on the innovative space. My question is about the data sharing aspect in Sandbox. When we consider it to be a place for innovation, a place where companies, big and small, will maybe compete. That's what I learned from Tragos, I think. But now, remember that in our digital world today, most of the companies which gather big data are big companies. So what are your incentives to convince those companies to share data? How do you plan to do that in practice, in a more practical way? Will you rely on such legislation like the DMA, for example, with the data sharing obligation? What are your perspectives? My question is also for Chris. What ICO is thinking about that? What's for the future? Thank you.
Okay, lots of questions. Shall we try to answer? Who would like to start? We had about 4 or 5 different topics.
I could maybe start with the
Kari.
practical, how do you apply the first question. I think it's quite similar in the ICO in Norway. You apply, you have like a roll on, roll off. We have some periods where we accept applications and then we evaluate them and we pick. And then what's your second question about what kind of guidance?
What is in practice?
Yes, practice, yes. Normally it's workshop based. We meet, maybe the participants send some documentation, we look at it and we discuss it together and try to find solutions in workshops type of thing, yeah.
We're very similar. One thing we always say, though, is obviously there's lots of guidance on our website, all that kind of stuff. One thing we always try and really stress is pick up the phone to us, drop us an email and have a conversation, because there's a lot of uncertainties people have about sandboxes. They don't always know some of the questions that they might not be happy writing down and sending to us. They're much happier to talk us through over the phone. So our starting point is always upfront engagement, come and talk to us. And we've moved over the last 3 years to put more and more emphasis on that upfront engagement discussion for all of the reasons we've just been talking about: understanding of risk, understanding of objectives, understanding of timescales, level of maturity, all things that are much better worked out before you get onto the project, so that you all know where you're starting from. So upfront engagement, but yeah, similar criteria-based application form. We have governance within ICO that then checks and validates kind of who we're accepting in. And then on the projects itself, a written sandbox plan where there are particular data protection challenges, queries, things you're not sure about, which we'll then look to explore with you in whatever way works. So similarly, workshops, reviewing documentation, iterating with us, trying to develop things together is essentially what it looks like.
And Chris, Carey, how long do they take normally, your projects in the sandbox?
Yeah, longer than we thought they would.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's definitely
Is it
one
3
of the,
months, 8 months, 10?
we tend to on the team we have an informal rule, which is if it's going longer than a year, it's been too long.
Okay.
So we try and keep them to less than a year.
Okay.
Realistically, most of them don't get done with between 3 months and a year, I would say, is the kind of sweet spot for doing something material that is worth doing, but without becoming their DPO.
Okay. Carrie, is that right?
Yeah, we try about 6 months, sometimes
6
it's a
months,
bit
okay.
longer. But the question about like how much enforcement action do you think you avoid by the sandbox? Like, have you thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have. It's quite difficult to put pound signs and euro signs on exactly the amounts, but I can give you a feel for the staffing. So the ICO Sandbox has 1 manager and 3 senior case officers, so operating at a sort of senior technical level and like a middle management kind of level. So the direct staffing costs are probably around, probably all in maybe 300,000-400,000 possibly, maybe a bit less. We bring in subject matter expertise from around the office as well, depending on the project. That doesn't tend to get costed onto the project. Maybe someone will do that and then it won't look as good. But at the moment, yeah, we don't cost those onto it. The benefits in terms of the enforcement side of it, doing the comparison, I mean, we haven't tried to put numbers on that, but if I take one of the bigger and more impactful projects that we're working on at the moment, so we're currently working with our betting and gaming industry. We're working with the trade body, some of the biggest gambling companies in the UK, to try and help them put in place innovative data sharing. Thinking about the amount of data that's involved in that, the scale of it, the challenges that there would then be in terms of enforcement if that were to go wrong, I think it just prima facie stands up as being cheaper to do it through the sandbox than to let it run, and the risk of it going wrong, and then all of the costs involved in enforcement. We haven't put numbers on it. We should do, and that's definitely the challenge that I'm getting from my leaders.
Can you both quickly answer the question of prior consultation? So what's the difference between Sandbox and prior consultation under GDPR? They're not the same, shouldn't be the same.
Yeah, we try to be very clear that it's not prior consultation. We don't give a stamp of approval. This is guidance and it's still up to them, and maybe we're a little bit more harsh. We say we can come and force tomorrow if we like, but this is early days project, so most of them are not even put into production, so we haven't really been in that situation. Yeah.
Dragos, you had some answers. They give us a few
Well,
more
I think
minutes.
first of all, in terms of name, I think Sandboxes was just there already when we started talking about this. At least I picked it up. I'm not a specialist, so. But when I opened up my eyes on this topic, I've kind of went along with Sandbox. Still have time to change it though. There was a precise question on why only the sandboxes in the AI.
Exactly.
Because there are other things. You can do policy prototyping, you can do a lot of other things to make sure that, again, you stay agile and adapt, and you do a lot of these trial and errors in different ways. To be honest, that's the only thing that the Commission put in the text, which doesn't mean that we will stop there. There's still room, actually there's quite ample room for refurbishing the text, and that's what we're going to do in the months I'm hoping, only months to come, and not more than that. So this discussion about how do we make sure that this text is as close to reality as possible, as close to the reality of the industry as possible, and also as adaptable as possible for the future. It's one of the central pieces of the deliberations that we're going to have in the months to come. So it's a bit early to tell you what else might come out of these deliberations, but again, what I can guarantee is that it's part of the focus that we'll have.
Okay, thank you so much. We've been told we have to finish. Erland, Kari, Chris, Dragos, fantastic conversation. Thank you for being open, thinking on your feet. We prepared some of these questions, but my gosh, it took us everywhere, the conversation. Thank you for the good questions. I'm sorry if we haven't quite answered all of yours. There is lunch served, so you can grab our speakers there. But we have a human right to lunch as well, I think. Yeah. So thanks a lot, everybody.